Christmas dinner smelled of roast lamb and simmering betrayal. My son, Ethan, rose from his chair at the head of the table, his wine glass held high, his voice a blade cutting through the festive murmur. "We've taken a vote, Dad. As of tonight, you are no longer a member of this family. We need you to leave this house." The guests, a mix of relatives and old friends, froze in a tableau of shock. Sophia, his wife, watched me from across the table, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. I met her gaze and smiled back, a slow, deliberate expression that wiped the smirk from her face. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. "Here is a parting gift for you, son." I slid it across the polished wood. He tore it open, his arrogance turning to disbelief, then to a raw, guttural scream. Everyone stared, their holiday cheer evaporating, not yet realizing that my quiet, methodical revenge had only just begun. They thought they had destroyed me, but they had only awakened a part of me I had long kept dormant. The dining room smelled of roasted potatoes and a thick, cloying resentment. The old oak table, a silent witness to decades of family dinners, bore the fresh scratches of our latest battle. Dirty plates, smeared with the remnants of a tense meal, sat untouched. Coffee had gone cold in chipped porcelain mugs. Ethan stood at the head of the table, his face flushed with wine and anger, his hands gesturing wildly like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of chaos. His wife, Sophia, sat opposite me, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her perfectly manicured nails tapping out a sharp, impatient rhythm of disdain against the silk of her sleeve. I gripped my fork, its cold, heavy metal a small anchor in the storm of their words. "Dad, we need the money," Ethan snapped, his voice sharp enough to rattle the crystal glassware. "This house is falling apart. You can't just sit on your savings while we're living in a relic." I raised an eyebrow, keeping my tone measured and even. "Hoarding? I paid off the mortgage on this house before you learned to walk, Ethan. This isn't about a leaky faucet. What is this really about?" Sophia leaned forward, her smile as thin and brittle as the layer of ice forming on the windowpanes. "It's about progress, Walter. We want to modernize. New floors, designer furniture, an open-concept kitchen. It's a design aesthetic you simply wouldn't understand." Oh, I understood plenty. The so-called repairs were a flimsy, transparent excuse. Sophia's phone, propped elegantly against her wine glass, was displaying a glossy architectural rendering of a kitchen that would cost more than my entire retirement fund. This wasn't about progress, it was about greed. Ethan, now pacing behind his chair, threw a folded piece of paper onto the table. It was a contractor's estimate, a ridiculously bloated document filled with unnecessary, high-end upgrades. I didn't need to look at it to know they had already spent the money in their heads, furnishing a life they felt entitled to but hadn't earned. "You have investments, Dad," Ethan pressed, his voice rising in frustration. "What's the point of letting them sit there? You're not getting any younger." The jab, meant to wound, stung as intended. But I kept my eyes on the table, my gaze tracing a familiar, deep scratch in the wood, a mark left when a 10-year-old Ethan had carved his initials with a butter knife. He had looked at me like I was his hero that day, his eyes wide with a mixture of mischief and adoration. Where had that boy gone? "I've given you enough," I said quietly, the words feeling inadequate. "You and Sophia live in this house, rent-free. That's more than most people your age get." Sophia scoffed, her laugh a sharp, metallic sound. "Rent-free? Living in this museum is a full-time job, Walter. We're doing you a favor by staying here and keeping up appearances." Ethan slammed his spoon onto his plate, the clatter echoing in the tense silence. "You're so damn selfish. You act like you're some kind of saint, but you're just holding us back from the life we deserve." The room fell quiet, the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that presses down on your chest. I tightened my grip on my fork, my knuckles turning white. It wasn't the first time he had raised his voice to me since his mother passed, but this felt different. It felt final. Sophia's eyes glinted with a cold triumph, as if she had been orchestrating this very explosion. I could have shouted back. I could have enumerated every sacrifice, every overtime shift at the engineering firm, the college tuition I'd paid in full, the classic car I'd sold without a second thought to fund his first failed business venture. But words were useless now. They were a currency he no longer valued. Selfish, I repeated, letting the word hang in the air between us. That's what you truly think of me? Ethan leaned closer, his breath hot and sour with expensive wine. Damn right, I do. You're not needed here anymore, Dad. We can handle this house, and our lives, without you. The air in the room seemed to shift, growing heavy with the unspoken finality of his declaration. Emily's lips twitched, barely containing her satisfaction. They thought they had won. I placed my fork down on the table, the movement deliberate and slow. I stood, my chair scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. I looked at Ethan, then at Sophia, their faces a perfect mirror of avarice and absolute certainty. I see, I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the firestorm in my chest. You've made your positions perfectly clear. I turned, my boots feeling like lead weights on the floor, and walked toward the hallway. Ethan's mocking voice followed me. What, that's it? You're just going to run off and sulk? I didn't answer. The dining room door, with its chipped white paint, loomed ahead, a portal out of a life that was no longer my own. As my hand reached for the cool brass knob, a single thought burned through the fog of my betrayal. I had given him everything. My time, my dreams, my home. No more. The door clicked shut behind me, muffling their voices. I stood in the dark hallway, my pulse beginning to slow and steady. They thought they could break me. They were about to find out how wrong they were. I would show them the true meaning of selfish. My bedroom was a time capsule, a sanctuary where every corner held the ghosts of a life I had built and now, it seemed, had lost. The old wooden bed frame creaked under my weight as I sat, the mattress sagging from years of restless nights. A single lamp cast a warm, amber glow over the room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. On my nightstand was a framed photo of Elizabeth and Ethan, taken when he was 6. His gap-toothed grin stared back at me, a stark, painful contrast to the cold-faced man who had just screamed that I wasn't needed. My fingers brushed the cool glass, trembling slightly. How had we arrived at this desolate place? The house was eerily silent, the kind of quiet that amplifies the frantic cacophony of your own thoughts. I opened the drawer of the bedside table, my hand closing around an old, leather-bound photo album. Its cover was worn smooth from years of being handled. Flipping through the thick, yellowed pages, I stopped at a picture of Ethan at 16, holding a football, his eyes bright with the kind of boundless dreams I had helped to fund. I had sold my cherry red Chevy convertible to pay for his college applications, telling Elizabeth it was just a car, an old piece of metal. She had squeezed my hand, her knowing smile telling me she saw right through the lie. We had both believed, with every fiber of our beings, that it was worth it. Another page, another memory frozen in time. Ethan's university graduation. I had worked double shifts for 4 straight years to cover his tuition, my back a constant, dull ache from long hours on my feet at the firm. He had hugged me that day, his graduation cap askew, his voice thick with emotion as he promised to make me proud. I had believed him then. Now, the memory was a twisted, serrated knife in my gut. He had never truly said thank you, not once. After Elizabeth's cancer took her 3 years ago, he had drifted even further away, leaving me to rattle around this big, empty house alone. Until Sophia came into the picture. Her sharp, predatory ambition had sunk its claws into him, validating his worst impulses, nurturing his latent greed. I turned the page and a folded, yellowed receipt fell out. A tuition payment for $12,000, dated 2005. I had drained my savings for that semester, telling myself it was an investment in his future. In our future, I had thought. Someone to carry on the family name, to share the comfortable life I had worked so hard to build. Instead, he brought home Sophia, whose cold, appraising eyes sized up this house not as a home filled with love and memories, but as a valuable asset to be claimed. She didn't change him. I saw that now. She had simply given him permission to become the man he had always been underneath. The album snapped shut with a sound of finality. I set it aside, my gaze falling on the photo of Elizabeth. Her soft curls, her warm, intelligent eyes, they had always been my anchor. I tried, Liz, I whispered, my voice rough with unshed tears. I gave him everything I had. But trying wasn't enough. Not when he stood in my dining room, spitting venom, egged on by a woman who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to her ambitions. I stood and crossed to the window. Outside, snow was falling in slow, heavy flakes, blanketing the quiet street in a pristine layer of white. The neighborhood was asleep, its festive Christmas lights blinking softly through the haze. I pressed my hand to the cold glass, my weary reflection staring back. Gray hair, tired eyes, but a jaw set with a new, unshakable purpose. I had spent decades being the father who provided, who forgave, who waited patiently for his son to become a better man. And for what? To be told I wasn't needed. To be cast aside. A memory surfaced. Ethan, maybe 8 years old, slamming his bedroom door after I'd grounded him for breaking a window. Even then, he had a temper. But he had always come back an hour later, his expression sheepish, with a mumbled apology. That boy was gone. The man he had become didn't deserve my patience, and neither did Sophia, with her calculated smiles and her dreams of a life she hadn't earned. I picked up my phone from the nightstand. Its screen glowed in the dim room. My thumb hovered over the number for Tom Riley. He would know where to start. Tom was a retired lawyer, a friend who had seen the world's ugliness and still came out swinging. The snow kept falling, soft and relentless, covering the old world. I wasn't a victim. Not anymore. I had been their foundation for far too long. It was time to build something for myself, on the ruins of the life they had just tried to destroy. The Old Oak, a dimly lit bar downtown, smelled of whiskey, worn leather, and regret. The dim lights cast long, dancing shadows across the dark wood paneling. I sat in a corner booth, the cracked vinyl seat creaking as I leaned forward, my hands wrapped around a glass of bourbon. Across from me, Tom Riley sipped his beer, his gray sweater as frayed as his legendary patience. He'd been my friend since our early days arguing over blueprints at the engineering firm, back when life was a simpler, more logical equation. I laid it all out for him. Ethan's shouting, Sophia's smug smirks, the calculated cruelty of their words. Tom listened intently, his eyes narrowing, the lines on his weathered face deepening with every sordid detail. When I finished, he set his glass down with a heavy thud. "They're vultures, Walter," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Circling, thinking they can peck you apart because you're older. Are you going to let them?" I swirled the bourbon in my glass, watching the amber liquid catch the dim light. "No. I'm done letting them do anything." Tom grinned, a rare, wolfish expression that always meant trouble for someone. "Good. That's the Walter I know. You have to hit them where it hurts. Their money, their pride. Find their weak spot and press down until something breaks." I nodded, my mind already churning. Ethan was impulsive, a reckless spender always chasing the next shiny object, a new car, a bigger TV, a risky stock. Sophia was worse. Her entire self-worth was tied to appearances, her social media feed a carefully curated shrine to a luxurious life she couldn't actually afford. They thought they could bully me out of my own home. I would show them what a lifetime of meticulous planning and quiet observation could do. Legally, of course, I added, meeting Tom's gaze. He chuckled, leaning back in the booth. Spoken like the man who used to double-check every weld and stress calculation on my projects. "You've got this, Walter. They have no idea who they're messing with." I pulled a small, black notebook from my coat pocket and flipped it open. My pen scratched across the first page, the word account standing out in sharp, dark ink. Ethan's finances were a chaotic mess. I'd seen the late notices he tried to hide in the mail. I'd seen the way Sophia flinched when her credit card was declined at a restaurant last month. That was my entry point. "You're a scarier man than I thought," Tom said, raising his glass in a toast. "To justice." I clinked my glass against his, the bourbon still untouched. "To consequences." The bar hummed around us. A jukebox in the corner played an old folk song, the kind Elizabeth used to hum while she was gardening. I pushed the memory away. Nostalgia was a weakness I couldn't afford right now. Tom leaned forward again, his voice dropping. "Are you sure about this? Once you start down this road, there's no turning back. It's your son." I met his eyes, my own gaze steady. He made his choice when he stopped being my son. Now, I'm making mine. He nodded, a glint of respect in his eyes. "Then don't flinch. They'll squirm when you start tightening the screws." I tucked the notebook away. The plan was beginning to form, the pieces clicking into place like the complex schematics I used to draw. I had been an engineer my whole life, building things that were meant to last. This time, I would be engineering their downfall, brick by careful, calculated brick. I stood, tossing a few bills on the table. "Thanks, Tom. I'll call you when it's done." He waved me off. "Don't call. Just do it." The door of the old oak groaned as I pushed it open, the cold night air biting at my face. Snow crunched under my boots. My breath clouded in the air, but my mind was crystal clear. Ethan and Sophia had built their lives on my foundation. And I knew exactly where all the structural weaknesses were. I walked on, the snow falling heavier now, each silent flake a harbinger of the storm I was about to unleash. The kitchen was dark, save for the narrow beam of my phone's flashlight cutting through the shadows. The oak table, usually a place for family meals, was now a makeshift battlefield, littered with scattered papers, bills, and receipts that Ethan had carelessly left out. I moved quietly, my old sweater catching on the sharp corner of a chair as I leaned over the mess. Each document was a window into their fragile, debt-ridden world. I lifted a credit card statement, the numbers glaring in the harsh light. Over $15,000 in debt, spread across designer clothes, lavish dinners, and spa treatments. Sophia's name was on at least half of the charges, including a $3,000 handbag that could have paid the property taxes for the entire year. A bitter smile tugged at my lips. She had mocked my museum of a house while gleefully burning through money they didn't have. Ethan wasn't any better. Late payments on his luxury SUV, a membership to a golf club he rarely visited. Their greed was a teetering house of cards, and I was about to remove the bottom one. My fingers paused on a formal-looking bank notice, the word overdue stamped in stark red ink. They had missed 2 mortgage payments on a small downtown condo they had bought as an investment property last year. Ethan had bragged about it endlessly, claiming it would make them rich. Now, the bank was threatening foreclosure. I scribbled the account number and the bank's contact information in my notebook, the scratching of the pen unnaturally loud in the silent house. A memory flickered, Sophia at dinner last week, her voice dripping with disdain as she talked about replacing my comfortable, well-loved furniture with something modern and elegant. Ethan had laughed and agreed, while I had stared at the photos on the mantelpiece, wondering when my son had stopped seeing this house as a home. They wanted to rip out the carpets Elizabeth had picked, to paint over the walls we had painted together. They wanted to erase her, and by extension, me. A sudden creak from the hallway made me freeze. My heart hammered against my ribs as I flicked off the flashlight, plunging the kitchen into absolute darkness. I pressed myself against the counter, my ears straining, listening. Nothing. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant, rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock in the living room. I let out a slow, silent breath. They were upstairs, asleep, oblivious to the fact that their own carelessness had just armed me to the teeth. I turned the light back on and continued my search. A receipt for a Wine of the Month club. Another for a weekend getaway they couldn't afford. Every line item was another thread in the web they had spun. My engineering career had taught me to find the weak points, the stress fractures in a structure that could bring the whole thing down. Their finances were a crumbling facade, and I was about to make sure they felt every single tremor. The notebook in my hand grew heavier with each new piece of information. I carefully folded the bank notice and tucked it into my pocket. This was never just about the money. It was about respect. About control. About showing them that I was not the feeble, irrelevant old man they had decided I was. Another creak, closer this time. Footsteps, slow and heavy, descending the stairs. Ethan. I snapped the notebook shut, shoving it deep into my pocket as I quickly returned the papers to their messy pile. The flashlight went off, and I moved silently toward the kitchen door. I paused, listening as the footsteps stopped just outside. "Dad?" Ethan's voice was groggy, but laced with suspicion. I didn't answer. My pulse was steady, my mind sharp. I eased the door open a crack. The hinges, which I had oiled myself just last month, made no sound. The hallway was dark, but I could see Ethan's large shadow looming at the far end. I slipped through the opening, my breath held tight, and melted into the deeper shadows of the house that I knew better than they ever would. The lawyer's office was a world away from my cozy, cluttered home. Glass walls, gray carpets, and the sharp, clean scent of ambition. I sat across from John Pierce, my old coat draped over the back of the chair, a folder of my meticulous notes open on the table between us. The Chicago skyline loomed outside, its steel towers glinting under a pale winter sun. John, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney I'd known from my engineering days, scanned my scribbled figures, his pen clicking rhythmically. "Are you certain about this, Walter?" he asked, his voice low, his eyes flicking up from the page. "This is an aggressive move." I nodded, my hands steady on the table. "They crossed a line, John. I'm just taking back what is rightfully mine." He leaned back, tapping the pen against his chin. "All right. Let's start with the will. You want Ethan completely removed?" "Completely." The word felt heavy, final. A pang of something, guilt, sorrow, hit me. Ethan was still my son. But the man who had disowned me was a stranger. I pushed the thought away and focused on the documents John slid toward me. The first was a revised will, naming a local children's hospital as my sole beneficiary. The house, my savings, my investments, everything. Ethan and Sophia would not see a single dime. I read it carefully, my old habit of scrutinizing contracts kicking in. Every clause was airtight. I signed my name, the scratch of the pen a quiet sound of victory. The second document was a bank form to freeze the joint account I still shared with Ethan, a relic from his college days. He'd never bothered to close it, and now that laziness was about to cost him dearly. John watched me, his expression unreadable. "You're cutting deep, Walter. They're going to feel this immediately." "They should have thought of that before," I said, my voice calm but edged with steel. I pulled out my phone and dialed the bank's 24-hour line. A quick, professional conversation, a few security codes, and the account was locked. Ethan wouldn't know until his next purchase was declined. I could already imagine his sputtering rage. We moved on to the house. John had drafted papers to place the property into an irrevocable trust, with me as the sole trustee. "They can't force a sale or claim ownership if you're the trustee," he explained. "And if they try to have you removed from the property, this gives you the legal high ground to have them evicted." I nodded, signing where he indicated. This house was my last bastion. I had poured my life into it, every nail, every shingle. I would be damned if they turned it into their personal ATM. John stacked the signed papers, his tone softening slightly. "Are you okay, Walter? This can't be easy." "It's necessary," I said, my jaw tight. They made their choice. We shook hands. As I stepped toward the door, my phone buzzed. A missed call from Ethan. My pulse quickened, but I didn't answer. He was already feeling the ground shift, even if he didn't know why. I stood on the sidewalk, the wind biting through my coat. The folder in my hand was a shield, a weapon, a map to justice. The phone buzzed again. Let him squirm. I had work to do. The living room was bathed in the flickering blue light of the television. Ethan paced back and forth, his phone clutched in his hand, its screen casting an eerie glow on his furious face. Sophia lounged on the new leather couch, the one they'd bought with money they didn't have, her calm a stark contrast to his rage. I stood just outside the room, concealed in the darkness of the kitchen, the door cracked just enough to see and hear everything. My own phone was in my hand, its screen dark, recording every single word. Do you see this? Ethan thrust his phone towards Sophia, his voice cracking with disbelief. The joint account is frozen. I tried to pay the car loan, and it bounced. Bounced. Sophia barely looked up. Calm down, Ethan. It's probably just a bank error. Call them in the morning. I did call them. He flung a magazine onto the floor. They said the account was locked by the primary holder. That's Dad, Sophia. He did this. I pressed closer to the door, my knuckles white around my phone. It was working. It was all working. Sophia finally sat up, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. Your father? Why would he bother with something so petty? Because he's spiteful. Ethan snapped. He's been sulking ever since we told him the truth about needing to sell this money pit. Sophia's lips curved into a slow, calculating smile. Then maybe it's time we helped him leave. This house is far too big for one old man anyway. We could sell it, move somewhere better. Somewhere, modern. My chest tightened, but I remained perfectly still. My phone, a silent witness, kept recording. Sell my house. The one I built with Elizabeth, where her laughter still seemed to echo in the walls if you listened closely enough. They weren't just greedy. They were heartless. Ethan stopped pacing. You think we can just kick him out? He's the owner. Sophia leaned forward, her voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. He's old, Ethan. He's becoming forgetful, confused. We'll say it's for his own good. We'll find him a nice little apartment somewhere. The house will stay with us. It's only fair. Fair. The word was a burning coal in my gut, but I didn't move. They were plotting to steal my life, right in front of me, oblivious to the net that was tightening around them. He won't go quietly, Ethan hesitated. Then we make him, Sophia said, her voice sharp now. We'll talk to a lawyer. We'll figure out our options. He can't stay here forever, dragging us down with him. The phone in my hand vibrated softly as the recording saved. I slipped back into the kitchen, my heart pounding, but my mind clear. They had just handed me everything I needed. Their own words would be the blade that severed them from this life they so desperately coveted. The new lock on my own front door gleamed under the porch light, its polished brass a cold, alien presence. My key, worn smooth from decades of use, scraped uselessly against the metal. I stood on the stoop, my breath clouding in the frigid night air. They had locked me out of my own home. I stepped back, my boots crunching in the fresh snow. The living room curtains were drawn, but I knew they were inside, probably celebrating their victory. Earlier that day, a cousin had called, her voice full of concern. Ethan and Sophia had been calling relatives, spinning a tale of my supposed instability, claiming I was unfit to manage my own affairs. This lock wasn't just a barrier, it was a public declaration of war. I circled the house. The side door, the back door, all fitted with new, unyielding deadbolts. My fingers brushed the familiar wood of the back door frame, remembering the summer I'd painted it with Elizabeth, her laughter mixing with the smell of fresh paint. The memory was a sharp pang, but I shoved it down. Sentiment was a luxury. I pulled out my phone and called Tom. "They've changed the locks," I said, my voice low. "And they're telling the family I'm losing my mind." Tom's laugh was a rough, angry bark. A bold move for a couple of amateurs. "They're scared, Walter. That's why they're pulling this stunt. Scared or not, they've crossed a line. Don't let them rattle you," he warned. "Stick to the plan." I hung up. The snow fell heavier, blanketing the yard in a suffocating silence. A text from my sister-in-law, Linda, lit up my screen. "Walter, what's happening? Ethan says you're not well." The sting of their betrayal deepened. They were trying to isolate me. But they had underestimated me. I pocketed the phone and walked away from the house, the snow muffling my steps. Let them gloat in their stolen castle. I knew a way back in. The cafe smelled of cinnamon and burnt coffee. I sat across from Sarah, Elizabeth's oldest friend, her bright red scarf a splash of color against the dreary day. "Walter, I heard something you need to know," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Ethan and Sophia are planning a big Christmas dinner. They've invited the whole family. They're going to make an announcement." "What kind of announcement?" I asked, keeping my face a neutral mask. Sarah hesitated. "They want to declare you legally incompetent. They're using the dinner to get the entire family on their side, to push for guardianship." The words were a punch to the gut, but I didn't flinch. So that was their endgame. A public execution, disguised as loving concern. I could already picture it, Ethan raising a glass, his voice dripping with false sincerity, Sophia nodding sadly, a portrait of worried devotion. "How did you hear this?" "Linda told me," Sarah said. "She's worried, but Ethan has her half convinced." I nodded, pulling out my phone and jotting down the details in my notes app. Christmas dinner. Family. Announcement. Guardianship. They had just handed me my stage. They wanted a spectacle. I would give them one they would never forget. "What are you going to do?" Sarah asked, her hand hovering near mine. "They're counting on me to crumble," I said, my jaw tight. "They're going to get a surprise instead." I left the cafe, my mind racing. The Christmas dinner was their trap, but it would be my theater. They had opened the door to their own downfall, and I was more than ready to step through it. John Pierce's office was my war room. The folder I'd prepared was spread across his polished desk, eviction notices, a court order to freeze all of their assets, and a meticulously cross-referenced list of their debts. "This is ironclad, Walter," John said, a rare note of approval in his voice. "The eviction notice is legal, backed by the trust you set up. They'll have 30 days to vacate. And the asset freeze is effective immediately. You've got them completely cornered." I signed the final page. The pen felt like a weapon. "And the evidence?" I asked, tapping the folder containing the audio recordings and screenshots of their conspiracy. "More than enough," John said. "If they try to fight this, it will bury them." At the bank, I finalized the freeze on every account tied to my name. No more designer bags for Sophia. No more reckless spending for Ethan. Back in John's office, we drafted the final piece, a formal letter outlining their eviction and the legal consequences of their actions. I slipped it into a plain envelope. It was my ace, ready to be played. "They won't see this coming," John said, shaking my hand. "They never did," I replied. The dining room glowed with candlelight. The old oak table was draped in a white cloth, set with Elizabeth's finest china. Relatives and friends filled the chairs, their faces a mixture of holiday cheer and nervous anticipation. Ethan stood at the head of the table, his smile as polished as his new watch. Sophia sat beside him, a portrait of serene elegance. I sat opposite them, my hands folded, the plain manila folder tucked beneath my chair. Ethan cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice loud and practiced. This Christmas is special. It's about family. But there's something we need to address. His gaze flickered to me. Dad, we've all been worried about you. This house, your finances, it's all too much. We've voted, as a family. You are no longer part of it. It's time for you to leave. A gasp rippled through the room. Linda's hand flew to her mouth. Sophia's smile widened, thin and sharp. The guests shifted, whispering, their eyes darting between us. They were waiting for me to break. I stood, slowly, deliberately. Is that so, Ethan? I said, my voice quiet but carrying through the room. You've decided I'm done? He smirked. It's for your own good, Dad. You'll thank us later. I reached under my chair and pulled out the folder. A parting gift, then, I said, my tone light but edged with steel. Open it. He hesitated, his smirk faltering, then took the folder. The room was utterly silent. He flipped it open. His eyes scanned the first page, the eviction notice, addressed to him and Sophia. His breath caught. He turned to the next document, the court order freezing their assets. Then the detailed list of their debts, their lies, their own words recorded and transcribed. What is this? He shouted, his voice cracking. The folder slipped from his trembling hands, its contents scattering across the table. You can't do this. I already have, I said, my gaze locked on his. You thought you could take my home, my life. Read the rest. It's all there. Sophia snatched a paper, her face turning ashen. This is a lie, she snapped, but her voice shook. The guests leaned closer, their whispers turning to murmurs of shock as they read the damning evidence. Ethan, is this true? Linda demanded, her voice sharp. You tried to sell his house? He stammered, his wine glass clattering to the table, red wine spilling across the white cloth like blood. It's not what it looks like. I stepped back, letting the chaos I had engineered unfold. Emily's eyes darted around the room, seeking allies, but finding only stunned disbelief. My cousin Tom stood up, his face a mask of disgust. You called him a burden, he said, pointing to the transcript. You plotted to kick him out. Ethan turned to me, his voice breaking. Dad, please, tell them it's a mistake. I met his gaze, my expression unmoving. You meant every word. You made your choice. Now, live with it. Walter, we're sorry. Sophia cried, her composure finally shattering. We can fix this. I shook my head. You had years to be a family. You chose greed instead. The guests were already leaving, their coats in hand. Linda paused by my side. I should have known better, Walter. I'm so sorry. This is our home, too. Ethan pleaded. It's mine, I said, the words final. It always was. I turned and walked out of the dining room, their desperate cries fading behind me. My new apartment was small, its bare walls still unfamiliar, but the large window offered a breathtaking view of the Chicago skyline, its lights twinkling through the falling snow. I sat at a simple desk, a single lamp casting a warm glow on a blank sheet of paper. The house was sold, quickly and for a good price, to a young family who would fill its rooms with new laughter. I had walked away with enough to start over, here in this quiet space, free from the ghosts of the past. Ethan and Sophia had vanished after that Christmas dinner, their belongings cleared out before the eviction deadline. I hadn't heard from them since. I pressed my pen to the paper. Ethan, I wrote, my handwriting steady. I've spent a long time wondering where I went wrong. But you chose your path, and I had to choose mine. I forgive you, not because you've earned it, but because I need to let go. This is goodbye. The words were simple, but they held the weight of a lifetime. The love, the betrayal, and the peace I was now claiming for myself. Forgiveness wasn't for them. It was for me. I stood and crossed to the window. The skyline stretched before me, its sharp edges softened by the storm. I had built a life once, and it was gone. But I was still here. Still standing. Ready to build something new. I slipped the letter into my coat pocket. The post office was just a short walk away. The snow was still falling, covering the old paths, making way for new ones. And I was ready to walk them.